You ever walked into an old church, and in some dark corner you suddenly notice a statue of Mary, but not in the usual white marble or bright colors? No, this one is black. Her skin, her robes, her face, all carved from dark stone, and yet the candles make her eyes shine like they're alive. I remember the first time I saw one, I just froze. My brain went, wait, why is the Virgin Mary black? And more importantly, why do these statues keep showing up in places where the Knights Templar once built their churches? Tonight, let's go down that rabbit hole together. Don't worry, I'm not here to give you a boring history lecture. Think of this as us sitting in a quiet cafe, just swapping one of those, did you know, stories that make you lean in. Because the Black Madonna isn't just some random art choice. To the Templars, she might have been a code, a secret, a connection to something way older than Christianity. So grab a blanket, maybe dim the lights, and let's start from the shadows carved in stone. If you've ever wandered through the French countryside, you'll know this feeling. Fields of wheat swaying, villages asleep in the afternoon sun, and then, suddenly, you stumble across something that doesn't belong. A ruin, half swallowed by ivy, stones cracked, roof fallen in, a place no one visits anymore. This is where our story begins. An abandoned chapel once belonging to the Knights Templar. You can almost hear the silence pressing in. The air feels cooler here, as if the walls themselves are still guarding a secret. Step inside, and you'll notice something strange. Most ruined chapels look the same. Broken pews, dust, maybe a faded cross. But in this one, against the far wall, there's a statue. Not tall, not grand, just different. She's a Madonna, cradling a child, but her skin, her robes, even the infant, are all carved in black. Not weathered stone, not stained by fire. Deliberately black. Now here's the part that makes me pause every time. These statues don't just appear once or twice. They're scattered across Europe, and the Templars seemed especially fond of them. People called them Black Madonnas. Some swore they were miracles, others whispered they were blasphemy. But in this forgotten chapel, standing before one of them, you don't need anyone's opinion. The thing speaks for itself. In the dim light, with dust floating like tiny stars, her face looks alive, almost watchful. And you can't help but wonder, why here, why her, and why like this? Most religious art from the Middle Ages has a kind of brightness to it. Gold leaf halos, pale skin, robes of deep blue or crimson. Everything designed to glow beneath candlelight. That's what makes the Black Madonna so jarring. She does the opposite. She swallows the light. Standing there, you feel it. Her presence doesn't reflect. It absorbs. It's as if the sculptor wanted her to look like she came from somewhere else entirely. Of course, scholars have tried to explain it away. Some say it's smoke damage, centuries of candle soot turning the surface dark. Others argue the pigments simply decayed. But here's the strange thing. If that were true, why are the features still so sharp? The lips, the eyes, the folds of the robe. They're too deliberate, too intentional. This wasn't an accident of time. Someone chose to make her black, and that choice matters. Because the Templars were not careless with symbols. Every banner, every cross, every carving they placed had weight. If they wanted this Madonna to be black, there was a reason. Now imagine yourself as a villager in the 13th century walking into this chapel. You kneel down expecting the familiar gentle Mary. Instead, you see this figure in black, child in arms, staring back at you. Would you feel comfort or unease? Maybe both. Maybe that was the point. And here's the question that keeps echoing in my mind. Was she meant to represent Mary at all? Or was she something older, something wrapped in the cloak of Christianity but carrying whispers of another faith beneath? If you start pulling at the thread of the Black Madonna, it doesn't lead deeper into Christianity. It slips backward, much further. Some historians trace her face not to Mary of Nazareth, but to Isis of Egypt, the mother goddess cradling her son Horus. The pose is nearly identical, the child balanced on the hip, the mother's gaze steady and timeless. Others see Cybele, the ancient mother of the earth, worshipped with wild rites in Rome, or Artemis of Ephesus, whose temple was once one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Wherever you look, you find echoes of women, dark, powerful, unyielding, who ruled long before Mary's story was ever told. And here's where it gets interesting. The Knights Templar weren't simple soldiers. They were travelers. They marched across lands, steeped in ancient religions. They passed through Egypt, Syria, Anatolia. They saw temples, idols, and mysteries long before they ever returned to Europe. So what if the Black Madonna wasn't just a symbol of Mary, but a fusion, a way to smuggle fragments of those older goddesses into the heart of Christian worship? Imagine a knight kneeling before her, not just praying to the Virgin, but also to the Eternal Mother, the one who was always there, long before Rome. And maybe that's why, when moonlight falls across her face in those quiet chapels, she feels alive. Not as a saint, but as a survivor, a remnant of a faith that refused to vanish, wearing the mask of Mary so it could endure. You'd think the Church would have tried to erase something like this. After all, it wasn't shy about destroying heresies. Entire sects were burned out of existence, entire libraries reduced to ash. And yet, the Black Madonnas remain, not celebrated, not officially explained, but tolerated. It's almost as if silence was the strategy. Don't speak of them, don't draw attention, just let them sit quietly in their corners. To pilgrims, they became holy. To priests, they were awkward. To the Vatican, they were inconvenient. And that silence is louder than any sermon. Because if the statues were really just soot-stained relics, why not restore them? Why not repaint them in the bright colors of tradition? Instead, they were left black century after century, as though no one dared to touch them. Which brings us back to the Templars. These were men who knew how to encode secrets in stone, who could hide entire meanings behind symbols that only the initiated would understand. Was the Black Madonna one of those codes? A quiet declaration that beneath the veneer of Christian Europe, older gods still breathed? And here's the part that unsettles me most. They are everywhere. France, Spain, Poland, even as far as the mountains of Switzerland. More than 400 Black Madonnas scattered like breadcrumbs across a continent. And when you map them, they don't appear random. They follow roads, trade routes, the very arteries of Europe itself. So in the quiet of that forgotten chapel, when you step back out into the daylight, you're left with one thought. This wasn't an isolated oddity. This was a network. And if we follow it far enough, it may lead us straight into the heart of the Templar mystery. Picture the map of medieval Europe. It isn't empty land. It's a web of roads and rivers, trade routes and pilgrimage paths that stitch the continent together like veins. Merchants carried spices from the Levant. Pilgrims walked barefoot toward Santiago de Compostela. Soldiers moved in columns toward distant crusades. Now imagine those 400 Black Madonnas scattered across this map. They weren't placed in remote valleys or forgotten villages at random. They stood along the very roads that mattered, the arteries of movement, the crossroads of faith and commerce. Pilgrims spoke of them in hushed tones, claiming that the Black Madonnas healed the sick, guided the lost, and offered protection against dangers on the road. Travelers left offerings, coins, scraps of cloth, small carved tokens. Each chapel became a beacon, not just of devotion, but of safe passage. And here's the curious part. Many of these chapels and shrines were either founded, funded, or guarded by the Knights Templar, the same order that controlled castles, ports, and entire fleets, the same order that knew how to turn faith into infrastructure. It almost feels as though the Black Madonnas weren't just religious icons. They were markers, silent signposts that said, here is a place protected, here is a place watched over. Here you can stop, rest, and maybe, if you know what to look for, learn something more. Because faith was only part of the pilgrimage, the road itself carried knowledge, whispers of cures, fragments of legends, old songs that kept memories alive. And in the shadows of those statues, the Templars may have been passing along something far older than trade goods, an inheritance of forgotten truth. The Knights Templar were more than warriors. They were bankers, architects, sailors, and, though few dared to say it out loud, custodians of knowledge. Their reach stretched from the sands of Jerusalem to the forests of France, and wherever they went, they seemed to leave behind traces, fortresses that aligned with the stars, chapels whose acoustics carried whispers like chants, and, of course, the Black Madonnas. Think about it, an order sworn to poverty, and yet they became one of the wealthiest powers in Europe. How? Because people trusted them. Pilgrims left their valuables in Templar hands, knowing the knights would guard them more fiercely than kings guarded their crowns. But trust is a fragile thing, and the Templars understood symbols. To reassure pilgrims, you don't need a contract, you need a sign, a figure watching from the shadows, silent, unblinking, promising protection. That's what the Black Madonna became. Not an ornament, but a seal, a signpost on the pilgrim road that said, "You are under our care." And yet there was another layer, one no document ever admits. Because the Templars didn't just protect, they preserved. Manuscripts from the East, fragments of Gnostic texts, whispers of alchemical formulas, they all found shelter within Templar walls. And some scholars believe the Black Madonnas were not only markers of safety, but also guardians of those hidden caches of knowledge. Picture a weary traveler stepping into a dim chapel, offering a prayer at her feet. He sees only the Virgin in black. But a Templar knight kneeling there might see something more, a coded message, a reminder that beneath the stone floor or behind the altar lay secrets meant only for the initiated. The silence of the statues wasn't emptiness, it was deliberate. A silence heavy with things not spoken aloud. And that silence stretches forward to us, centuries later, inviting us to lean in closer, if we dare. By the dawn of the 14th century, the Templars were everywhere, and that was the problem. Their Red Cross flew above castles in France, Spain, England, and the Holy Land. Their treasuries held the wealth of nobles and kings, and their secrecy. That drove monarchs mad. In 1307, on a cold October morning, the hammer fell. King Philip IV of France, drowning in debt to the Templars, moved first. His men stormed Templar commanderies across the realm, dragging knights from their beds, binding them in chains. The charge? Heresy, idolatry, worship of demons. But here's the question. Where did those accusations come from? Among the strangest charges was the claim that the Templars worshipped a mysterious head, a carved relic they kept hidden. Some said it was the head of John the Baptist, others claimed it was a bearded idol infused with unholy power. Yet when you compare that rumor with what the Templars left behind, the Black Madonnas, the hidden shrines, the silent guardians, you start to wonder if the head was never a literal object. Perhaps it was symbolic. Perhaps it was one more echo of the ancient goddess, the divine feminine smuggled into Europe's holiest halls. And here lies the irony. The very statues that pilgrims trusted, the very images that soothed and protected, were twisted into evidence of blasphemy. What was sacred for some became monstrous for others. In the dungeons of Paris, knights were broken on the rack until they confessed to whatever their captors wanted. By firelight, scribes wrote their words onto parchment, sealing their fate. But between those tortured lines, a darker truth lingers. The church and the crown, weren't afraid of demons. They were afraid of secrets, and secrets were what the Templars had in abundance. When you read the charges against the Templars, the pattern is almost too neat. Spitting on the cross, denying Christ, kissing strange places on the body, whispered oaths before dark idols. To a medieval crowd, it was scandal. To a king drowning in debt, it was a weapon. But to anyone who looks closer, the question isn't what they were accused of, it's what those accusations were hiding. The Black Madonnas sat silent in their chapels, but the Templars knew what they meant. They represented continuity, threads stretching back before the cathedrals, before even Rome itself. A memory of a mother goddess who ruled not with the sword, but with cycles of earth, fertility, and renewal. For a church that sought absolute authority, that was dangerous. If people believed divinity could be feminine, if they believed wisdom might come from sources outside the sanctioned Gospels, then the monopoly of Rome cracked. And for Philip IV, whose power was always thinner than his pride, it was an opportunity. By turning symbols into sins, he could erase debts with a single stroke of fire. But here's the strange thing. Not all of the accusations were pure invention. Some fragments of testimony, hidden between lines of forced confessions, speak of initiation rites where knights were asked to abandon pride, to embrace humility, even to face the darkness before re-emerging into light. To outsiders, those rituals looked suspicious. To insiders, they were training the soul for something deeper. So what secrets did the Templars really guard? We'll never have a complete answer. Some believe they carried fragments of lost Gospels, writings too radical for Rome to allow. Others argue they held ancient texts smuggled from the ruins of Solomon's temple, knowledge of geometry, medicine, even astronomy. But whatever the truth, one thing is certain. The silence of the Black Madonnas, the whispers of hidden heads, the accusations of forbidden rites, they all point in the same direction. The Templars weren't merely soldiers of the cross. They were custodians of a story older, stranger, and far more dangerous than their enemies ever admitted. And for that, they were broken, publicly destroyed. But destruction is never the end. In history, fire does not consume everything. Sometimes it leaves behind embers. The morning of October 13th, 1307 was supposed to be an ending. Across France, the Templars were dragged away in chains, their lands seized, their treasuries emptied into the king's coffers, their leaders tortured until they muttered whatever heresies the crown demanded. In Paris, Jacques de Molay, the last Grand Master, would meet the pyre with dignity, refusing to bend even as the flames licked his robes. But history is rarely as clean as kings imagine. Ashes scatter, seeds hide in the soil, and sometimes what seems like an ending is only a scattering. The Templar order was shattered in public view, yes, but in whispers and shadows, it survived. Some knights fled to Scotland, carrying their banners into lands where papal writs were little more than parchment. Others slipped into Portugal, where the crown simply renamed them the Order of Christ, and allowed them to keep their ships and their knowledge. And then there are the subtler trails, the chapels that kept their Black Madonnas, the villages that claimed a Templar knight stayed among them, the manuscripts that vanished from inventories only to resurface centuries later in private collections. The enemies of the Templars wanted the story to end in fire, but instead it branched. Pieces of the order scattered into Europe's veins, flowing quietly into guilds, monasteries, and families. And wherever those fragments traveled, the silence of the Black Madonna traveled with them, still watching, still guarding, still whispering to those who dared to listen. Because the truth is this: you can burn men, you can seize their gold, but you cannot kill an idea. And the Templar idea, that faith could hold secrets, that knowledge could be guarded in stone and symbol, was not so easily erased. In France, the Templars became ashes and smoke. But across the seas and mountains, the story bent instead of breaking. If you trace the maps of the early 14th century carefully, you see strange movements, knights without banners, ships that left harbor without ever docking again, fortunes that seem to vanish and then reappear in unexpected hands. Take Scotland. In 1307, it was already a land at war, where papal decrees held little sway and loyalty shifted with the winds. Local legends whisper that a band of Templar knights found refuge there, offering their swords to Robert the Bruce, who had been excommunicated himself. Some accounts, half history, half rumor, claim Templar horsemen appeared at the Battle of Bannockburn in 1314, their white mantles flashing in the chaos, turning the tide. Whether true or not, the tale endured, because it gave the Templars something more valuable than survival: myth. And then, Portugal. Unlike France, its king was pragmatic. He saw no need to destroy men who had fortresses, fleets, and skills that could build empires. So the Templars were dissolved in name only. They re-emerged as the Order of Christ, wearing different insignia but keeping their lands, their ships, and perhaps most importantly, their archives. From this rebirth would come navigators, cartographers, and explorers who opened the seas in the Age of Discovery. When caravels pushed past the horizon, some said it was Templar knowledge, disguised under a new banner that guided them. What does this tell us? That destruction is never total. It scatters, it reshapes, but it also plants. The black Madonnas remained in their chapels, unbroken. Symbols kept watch. And in the silence of those statues, pilgrims and villagers could still sense that something lingered, a promise that had not been erased by fire. The story of the Templars after 1307 is less about what they lost and more about what slipped through the cracks. Their enemies saw flames. But in the shadows behind the firelight, seeds were being planted in new soil. Fire destroys paper and flesh, but lineage is harder to erase. One of the strangest legacies of the Templars after 1307 is not just where their gold went or where their ships vanished, but where their families ended up. Now, officially, the Templars had no heirs. Their vows bound them to poverty, chastity, obedience. But we know history is messier than vows. In villages surrounding commanderies, in towns where knights were stationed for decades, rumors persisted of children, sons and daughters who bore the quiet seal of their father's order. Not openly, never publicly, but whispered nonetheless. Some chronicles even suggest that before the arrests, certain knights were quietly instructed to seed the blood, to ensure that if the order was shattered, something of it would endure in flesh rather than stone. Is that provable? No. But think about how stories of hidden heirs always surface when empires collapse. It's not always about truth, it's about hope. By the 15th and 16th centuries, a handful of noble families in France and Portugal were whispered to carry the Red Cross in their veins. They married into merchant dynasties. They surfaced in court records, sometimes with unusual privileges that hinted at invisible protection. It wasn't treasure chests or lost relics that carried the Templar memory forward. It was surnames, crests, and quiet inheritances. And here's the striking part. Wherever these bloodline rumors appear, you often find Black Madonna shrines nearby, as if the people needed a silent witness to connect the living flesh with the broken order. To kings and popes, the Templars were gone. To villagers lighting candles at those shrines, they had never truly left. They had simply melted into the crowd, their legacy carried in names and blood. If bloodlines truly survived, then where did they flow? The trail doesn't vanish into thin air. It bends toward power, and in medieval Europe, all rivers eventually ran into Rome. Across the 15th century, certain clerical families suddenly rose with startling speed. Minor nobles became bishops, Merchants became cardinals. In a church where advancement usually took generations, these were leaps. Some historians see nothing unusual here: ambition, wealth, politics. But others whisper that invisible hands guided those ascents, hands that bore the memory of the Red Cross. The Vatican itself seemed both hunter and host. Officially, the papacy condemned the Templars, stamping their memory with charges of heresy. Yet at the same time, Vatican treasuries absorbed their confiscated wealth, their lands, their libraries. And within the halls of St. Peter's, rumors swirled of certain cardinals who protected Black Madonna shrines, who preserved fragments of manuscripts said to have been rescued from burning pyres. It's almost as if Rome swallowed the Templars whole, condemning them with one mouth while digesting their secrets with the other. And bloodlines. Some argue they braided quietly into the same dynasties that produced popes, anti-popes, and shadowed princes of the Church. Was it coincidence that, centuries later, Portuguese navigators of the Order of Christ carried papal blessings as they pushed past the edge of the known world? Or was it that the Vatican recognized those knights not as strangers, but as distant kin? We cannot prove these veins with genealogical charts. But history isn't just written in ink and seals. Sometimes it's written in who survives, who thrives, and who seems untouchable when others fall. The irony is sharp. The blood once hunted as heretical may have flowed quietly into the very institution that condemned it. And in Rome's echoing halls, the silence of the Black Madonna may still have lingered, listening. When the king's soldiers burst into Templar commanderies on that October morning in 1307, they were looking for gold, for weapons, for evidence of heresy. But many whispered that what mattered most wasn't locked in treasure vaults, it was in the libraries. Templar preceptories across Europe kept archives, land deeds, letters of credit, spiritual texts, even manuals of ritual. Some of this was practical, part of running what had become a medieval banking empire. But there were always rumors that other shelves held stranger things. Fragments of ancient philosophy, mystical writings brought back from the East, translations of texts that the Church did not want widely read. After the arrests, some libraries were catalogued and seized. Yet, curiously, others simply vanished. At the great Paris temple, chroniclers record carts of documents being taken away in the night before the king's men arrived. No one saw them again. In Aragon, inquisitors complained that only scraps of records remained. And in Portugal, certain manuscripts were never even mentioned in seizure inventories, as though they had slipped from sight before the ink of the warrants was dry. Where did they go? One story insists they were hidden in Avignon, where the papacy had moved, tucked away in secret Vatican vaults. Another says fugitive brothers carried them west, across the mountains, into Portugal's strongholds. Others imagine they traveled by ship, disappearing with the mysterious fleet that sailed from La Rochelle and never returned. We can't say for certain, but here is the thread. When knowledge vanishes without trace, people assume it was dangerous. And that assumption alone is enough to keep a legend alive. So while kings searched for coins, perhaps the knights were moving something more volatile, ideas. Because gold can be melted down, but a manuscript, a phrase, a map, a story, those can ignite centuries. If the manuscripts were smoke, what remained carved in stone were the embers. The Templars left behind a language of symbols, subtle, quiet, but persistent, that may have spoken louder than words to those who knew how to read them. Walk into certain chapels once held by the order, and you'll notice patterns that seem more than decorative. 8-pointed crosses hidden in window tracery. Pairs of knights on a single horse etched into door lintels. Circles of interlocking geometry set into floor tiles, faint beneath centuries of footsteps. To the untrained eye, these are embellishments. To the initiated, perhaps they were markers. This place is safe. This place is ours. Even Gothic architecture itself, that leap toward heaven, that play of light and shadow, was sometimes whispered to have been shaped by Templar masons. The proportions of cathedrals, the angles of arches, the measured repetition of forms, all of it felt like a visual code, a geometry that hinted at secret knowledge of God's order. And then there were the marks in stone, the masons' signatures. Ordinary builders carved initials or simple shapes. But in Templar sites, you sometimes find stranger symbols, stars enclosed within circles, serpents coiled around crosses, or a peculiar V shape that scholars have argued over for centuries. Were they just tools of identification, or were they breadcrumbs left for those who would come after, a quiet reminder that even if the order was broken, its voice still lingered in chisel and mortar? To peasants lighting candles in those chapels, the meaning may have been invisible, but to a brother passing through foreign lands, one glance at a carved emblem might say more than a letter carried under seal. It might whisper, "You are not alone. The circle is unbroken. These symbols, scattered and half-hidden, are not proof. They are suggestion, and suggestion can be more enduring than fact, because when a symbol touches the imagination, it can survive in memory long after parchment has crumbled into dust." Among the wildest threads woven around the Templars is the claim that they guarded not just wealth, not just relics, but words. Words so dangerous that the Church itself feared their breath. Some chroniclers from later centuries whispered about a hidden gospel, not the canonical four, but something older, stranger. A scroll carried back from the Holy Land, perhaps found in Jerusalem's ruined temples or traded in the bazaars of Antioch. Its contents? No one can say for certain. Some insist it told a version of Christ's life that undermined the authority of Rome. Others believe it contained teachings more mystical than doctrinal, fragments of a faith rooted in the desert winds and ancient stars. The idea is tantalizing, precisely because no such manuscript has ever been found. But in the gaps of history, absence becomes its own kind of evidence. Why, some ask, were the Templars accused of spitting on the cross or of worshipping a mysterious head? Were those charges inventions of their enemies or distorted echoes of practices born from a text we no longer have? The Vatican, of course, has always denied such stories. Officially, there is no hidden gospel in its vaults. Yet whispers persist that beneath the apostolic palace, in chambers deeper than the catacombs, there are sealed cases marked not with papal crests, but with sigils no archivist today can read. The Black Madonna, the skull reliquaries, the fragments of parchment said to be written in an unrecognizable hand. All of it fuels speculation that something was indeed preserved, however fragmentary. For the Templars, if such a gospel existed, it would have been less about overthrowing Rome and more about independence. A sacred text not chained to papal decree, one that could justify why their brotherhood answered to no king, no bishop, no pope. We may never know if this hidden gospel was real or imagined, but the mere suggestion that it might have existed is enough to stir unease, because it reminds us that history is not only what survives, it is also what is deliberately buried, and the deepest secrets are often those no one dares to confirm. When the last Grand Master, Jacques de Molay, burned at the stake in 1314, many believed it was the end of the Templars. The Pope had dissolved the order, kings had scattered their lands, and their brothers were outlawed across Christendom. But death, as history teaches us, does not always sever a lineage. Sometimes it forces it underground. In the decades after the trials, whispers began to circle not of treasure or manuscripts, but of blood. Some claimed that before the arrests, senior Templars arranged marriages in secret, binding their noble knights to powerful families across Europe. These unions, hidden from the Church's gaze, created threads of kinship that wove silently into the fabric of dynasties. French chroniclers in the 14th century spoke of sons of the temple, appearing in Burgundy, their coats of arms marked by strange variations of the Red Cross. In Scotland, local tradition held that certain clans traced their line back to fugitive Templars who fought beside Robert the Bruce at Bannockburn. And in Portugal, where the order was rebranded as the Order of Christ, descendants carried forward not just the lands but the names of men who had once sworn eternal vows of celibacy. Of course, all of this unsettled the Church. If true, it meant the Order's ideals had not been extinguished. They had become hereditary, passed down like hair color or a family crest. Imagine the anxiety this could create. The idea that somewhere in the courts of Europe, in the very families who married daughters to kings, there flowed a bloodline that once bent the knee to no crown but its own. Some legends push this even further. They speak of a chosen heir, a hidden scion entrusted with both relic and secret, kept safe across generations like a seed beneath the soil. Whether or not such a figure ever lived, the myth itself gave hope to those who still dreamed of a Templar return. Because an order can be abolished by decree, a treasure can be seized, but a bloodline can wait. The rumor of a Templar bloodline would have been easy to dismiss, a fireside tale for restless peasants, if not for the way certain dynasties seemed to bend toward the legend, as if drawn by an invisible thread. Take the Valois and Bourbon courts of France. In the 15th century, when genealogists prepared marriage contracts, strange notation sometimes appeared in the margins, references to knights whose names no longer existed in official records. Descended from the temple, one clerk scribbled beside a minor noble family absorbed into the Bourbon line. Was it a flourish of pride, or an echo of something more carefully guarded? In the Iberian kingdoms, the trail is more visible. When the Order of Christ absorbed the remnants of the Templars in Portugal, it wasn't just lands that changed hands. Lineages did too. Families tied by blood or loyalty to the knights quietly retained their identity under the new name, while their sons carried the insignia of the Red Cross aboard the caravels of Henry the Navigator. Some chroniclers would later whisper, the Age of Discovery was not just Portugal's triumph, it was the Templars' rebirth on the seas. Scotland held its own legends. The Sinclair family of Rosslyn, patrons of the now mythic Rosslyn Chapel, were said to descend from Templar fugitives sheltered after Bannockburn. The chapel itself, built in the 15th century, became a treasury of symbols that many still claim reveal an unbroken link to the order, carvings of knights, crosses, and plants unknown in medieval Europe. Whether fact or fable, the Sinclair blood was said to carry a memory older than the nation itself. Even the Medici of Florence, the bankers of popes, were occasionally tied to the story. Though no document proves a direct link, the idea that the most powerful family in Renaissance Europe might have carried a whisper of Templar blood thrilled those who saw history as a game of hidden continuities. What matters isn't whether these genealogies hold up under modern scrutiny. What matters is that generations believed them, repeated them, and wove them into the fabric of their dynastic pride. Belief gave the bloodline its power. Because a secret is not only what is kept, it is what is imagined, passed along at banquet tables and whispered in marriage negotiations. The suggestion that one's child might carry the blood of a knight of the temple was as valuable as gold, even if it could never be proven. And so the Templars lived on, not in commanderies or castles, but in names, in marriages, in the quiet certainty that somewhere within the palaces of Europe their blood still flowed. When the hammer first fell upon the Templars in 1307, the Vatican scrambled to shape the story. Pope Clement V, himself caught between loyalty to his office and pressure from King Philip IV of France, issued a series of bulls that seemed to both condemn and protect the order. One moment, the knights were accused of spitting on the cross, worshipping idols, and committing unspeakable sins. The next, Clement insisted they should be tried under the Church's authority, not the king's. It was a tug of war written in parchment and sealed with wax. The official documents that survived, bulls like Pastoralis Praeeminentiae and later the decrees of the Council of Vienne, present the picture of an institution cornered. The Pope never declared the Templars guilty of heresy and doctrine. Instead, the order was dissolved for the good of the Church, a phrase that says more in what it avoids than what it admits. But if you read closely, a strange silence emerges. The bulls list accusations, record confessions, often wrung from torture, and outline procedures for inquiry. Yet nowhere do they definitively say the order's inner secrets were false. No papal bull ever states, for example, the rumors of hidden relics are lies, or the bloodline stories are fabrications. The absence of denial is almost as loud as an admission. The Council of Vienne in 1312 formally closed the order, its assets transferred to the Knights Hospitaller, but again, the documents stop short of closure. They do not erase the knights from memory. They do not forbid discussion of them. They simply stop. Imagine a ledger abruptly cut off mid-line. Imagine a trial transcript with the last pages missing. That is how the official record of the Templars feels. What remains is both presence and absence, the echo of accusations without a final verdict. And into that silence, rumor rushed like water through a broken dam. For centuries after the dissolution, scholars and dreamers alike turned their eyes toward one building in Rome, the Vatican's Archivum Secretum Apostolicum, the so-called secret archives. Its name alone was enough to ignite imaginations, though in truth, secretum simply meant private. Still, it is difficult to shake the sense that behind those guarded doors lies the unfinished story of the Templars. In those endless halls of parchment and leather-bound codices, more than 50 miles of shelves carry the weight of Christendom's history. Among them, researchers whisper, are files from the trials of 1307-1312, confessions written in trembling hands, lists of seized goods, letters between bishops. Some of these documents have been released, the Chinon parchment, for example, discovered in 2001, which revealed that Pope Clement had actually absolved the Templar leadership of heresy. That single discovery shook centuries of assumptions. If one parchment survived to rewrite the narrative, how many more lie unread? Stories ripple through the scholarly world. A sealed bundle labeled Ordo Templi that none outside a circle of archivists has handled. Marginal notes in trial transcripts hinting at names removed from the record. An inventory that suggests not all relics were confiscated. The Vatican neither confirms nor denies such whispers. The doors of the archive open only a crack at a time, and only to those with permission. And so the mystery grows. Each scrap released, each papal letter, each trial fragment, feels like a breadcrumb leading deeper into a labyrinth whose center no one has yet seen. Was the silence of Clement deliberate? Was he protecting not just men, but something larger, knowledge, relics, or perhaps a bloodline too dangerous to reveal? It is the perfect soil for myth, a vault that exists, guarded by centuries of secrecy, holding documents that may or may not explain why the order vanished, yet refused to die. When people think of history, they often imagine it written in stone, clean, permanent, unchanging. But with the Templars, what endures is not what was said. It is what was carefully left unsaid. The Vatican never issued a final, definitive condemnation of the order's beliefs. They never called their rituals outright heresy. They never erased their name from the rolls of Christendom, as they might have with a sect truly considered dangerous to the soul of the Church. Instead, they dissolved the order for the peace of the Church. It was a bureaucratic phrase, hollow and ambiguous, a verdict that explained nothing. This silence has echoed for 7 centuries. Had Clement V declared the Templars were guilty, their teachings false, perhaps the story would have ended. Had he announced they were innocent, martyrs to the crown of France, perhaps we would remember them as tragic victims. But the lack of resolution left the wound open. In the absence of certainty, speculation thrived. That ambiguity was not a failure, it was strategy. By leaving the question unresolved, the Vatican deflected the fury of Philip IV without committing to his narrative. They dissolved the order without damning it. In doing so, they created a vacuum of meaning, one that legends rushed to fill. And those legends, of hidden relics, of buried treasure, of bloodlines surviving in secret, gained their power, not in spite of the Vatican's silence, but because of it. The greatest myths do not spring from lies. They are born in the gaps of truth. So when we talk of Templar mysteries today, we are really speaking of that pause, that refusal, that deliberate decision to say less. The Church's silence became the forge in which the legend was made. And perhaps that was always the point. When the last embers of the Templar trials burned out, it seemed as if history had closed the book. Kings had seized their castles, the Hospitallers had inherited their properties, and the Church had turned the page. But outside the marble chambers of power, the order never really died. It slipped into the voices of villagers, the firesides of taverns, and the slow gossip that passes from one generation to the next. In France, there were whispers of wagons leaving the temple precinct in Paris the night before the arrests. Wagons covered with tarps, guarded by silent men. Some said the carts carried gold, others claimed they bore relics, the Ark of the Covenant, the Holy Grail, or books of dangerous knowledge. No one could prove it, but no one forgot it either. In the villages of Spain, farmers told stories of Templar knights who rode into the hills with chests bound in iron, only to vanish into caves that no one could ever find again. In the Alps, locals swore that ruined chapels hid tunnels leading to chambers, still heavy with incense and treasure. Even the land itself seemed to hold on to them. Abandoned commanderies were said to glow faintly under the moon. Springs near old Templar sites were believed to cure sickness. In Brittany, a ruined tower was avoided, for people claimed you could still hear chanting at midnight, a service held by monks who had long since been turned to dust. These were not histories written by clerks or lawyers. They were fragments of memory reshaped into myth. And that was their strength. While parchments could be locked away or lost to fire, stories told by mouth lived on, traveling further than any manuscript. The silence of the Vatican had left a gap. Folk memory rushed to fill it. And in doing so, the Templars were no longer just men who lived and died in the 12th and 13th centuries. They became something else. Guardians, wanderers, keepers of secrets that the powerful dared not name. It is here, in these hushed tales, that the Order's afterlife truly began. By the time Europe emerged from the long shadow of the Middle Ages, the Templars had already been dead for 2 centuries. Yet their ghost lingered. Scholars in the Renaissance rediscovered forgotten manuscripts, piecing together chronicles that mentioned the Order's rise and its sudden fall. Artists painted ruined chapels and weathered crosses, imagining what might lie beneath the moss. But it was not until the Romantic era, the age of poets, rebels, and dreamers in the 18th and 19th centuries, that the Templars were reborn as something larger than history. To a Europe wrestling with revolutions and the collapse of old certainties, the Templar knight became a canvas for longing. Writers turned them into tragic heroes, noble men betrayed by politics, martyrs burned not for heresy, but for defying corrupt kings and cautious popes. The medieval knight, once feared, became a figure of melancholy beauty. In novels, the Order's downfall was retold with thunder and fire, treasure wagons thundering into the night, secret oaths sworn in shadowed crypts, a brotherhood scattered but never destroyed. The more history left unsaid, the more imagination rushed in. And imagination was generous. By the 19th century, Templar ruins became destinations of pilgrimage for painters and poets alike. A collapsed chapel wall in Portugal might be framed as a monument to resistance. A crumbling fortress in France became a stage on which the drama of betrayal was retold. The Templar became not a relic of medieval politics, but a symbol of eternal rebellion, the dream of freedom against tyranny, mystery against order. It is no accident that during this time, secret societies also flourished. Freemasons, Rosicrucians, and countless smaller brotherhoods began claiming the Templars as their ancestors, not by blood, but by spirit. Their rituals, symbols, and stories echoed fragments of the medieval order, whether those connections were real or simply imagined. In this way, the Romantic Age gave the Templars a new mask. No longer just victims of history, they became the very image of the hidden, the noble, the forbidden. And once an idea takes root in culture, it rarely dies. It only waits for its next transformation. By the time the modern world arrived, with newspapers, printing presses, and eventually cinema, the Templars were no longer a medieval order at all. They had become an archetype, a flexible symbol that could be reshaped to fit whatever story people needed to tell. In the 18th century, the Freemasons claimed their inheritance. They built entire rituals around the idea that the Templars had survived underground. Their secrets passed from hand to hand until finally reborn in the lodges of Europe. Whether those links were historical or not mattered less than the belief itself. The Templar cross became a sign not only of medieval faith, but of hidden brotherhood and mystery. In the 19th century, conspiracy theorists folded the order into tales of lost relics and forbidden bloodlines. Was it the Grail they carried away in those wagons? Or something even stranger? A truth about Christ's descendants buried so deep the Vatican itself trembled. These were questions without answers, and that made them irresistible. The 20th century gave them a new stage, popular culture. The Templars appeared in pulp novels, in the background of esoteric thrillers, and finally in blockbuster films and video games. They could be villains or guardians, treasure hunters or keepers of terrible secrets. Always hidden, always just beyond the reach of certainty. And in the age of the internet, the myth has only grown louder. Forums, documentaries, and countless theories have kept the Templar name alive. For some, they are the protectors of Christ's bloodline. For others, they are conspirators in a global web of power. To many more, they are simply the most compelling mystery the Middle Ages ever gave us. What makes the Templar legend endure is not the certainty of what they did or did not do. It is the gaps, the silences left by the Vatican, the ambiguity of their rituals, the unanswered questions about treasure and relics. Legends thrive in those spaces, and the Templars have been living in them for 700 years. Their afterlife is proof of a strange truth. Sometimes, history does not need to survive on facts. Sometimes, it survives on whispers. The story of the Templars does not end with their arrests in 1307, nor with the flames that consumed Jacques de Molay on the Ile de la Cité. If it had, they might be remembered as nothing more than another medieval order that rose and fell with the tides of politics. But what makes the Templars endure is not what we know. It is what we do not. The Vatican's trial records are filled with contradictions, with silences, with entire gaps that no scholar has ever been able to bridge. The knights themselves left almost nothing behind. No memoirs, no manifestos, only hints scattered in charters and property lists. What remained was absence, and absence is fertile ground for stories. Over the centuries, people have filled that silence with meaning. To some, the order became guardians of hidden relics, carrying away the Grail under cover of night. To others, they were martyrs of justice, destroyed by a king's greed and a pope's fear. And still others saw them as the ancestors of secret brotherhoods, passing down knowledge too dangerous to reveal. Each age remade the Templars in its own image. The Romantics saw tragic heroes, the Freemasons saw forebears, the novelists saw conspirators, and the filmmakers saw villains and visionaries alike. The order itself may be gone, but in this way they achieved something close to immortality. When you walk today among the ruins of their fortresses, stones weathered by centuries of wind and rain, it is not what you see that matters most. It is what you imagine. The silence of those broken walls speaks louder than any chronicler, and perhaps that silence is their true legacy. What is it about the Templars that refuses to fade? We live in an age where information flows faster than ever, where secrets rarely survive a single news cycle. Yet the Templars, gone for more than 7 centuries, remain a presence. They appear in novels and films, in theories whispered on late-night radio, in the symbols etched onto rings and walls of modern brotherhoods. Their shadow has outlived kings, empires, and even the churchmen who condemned them. Perhaps it is because their story feels unfinished. The last Grand Master cursed his accusers before the flames claimed him. The wagons that may or may not have left Paris under cover of night were never found. The archives of the Vatican still hold locked drawers, some opened only rarely, some never at all. Or perhaps it is because the Templars touch something deeper in us, the desire to believe that power and knowledge can be hidden, that there are still mysteries in a world that often feels over-explained. Their story reminds us that history is not a neat ledger of facts, but a living thing with silences as meaningful as words. And maybe that is why you are here, listening now. Not for an answer, but for the quiet thrill of the question. So tonight, as you put your phone aside and let your eyes close, imagine the echo of boots across stone corridors, the flutter of a banner caught in the dark, the murmur of a vow sworn in secret. Imagine that the order never truly ended, but simply stepped sideways into legend. Because in the end, that is what the Templars gave us. Not certainty, but mystery. And mystery, once born, does not die.
Surgat Deus et et dissipentur inimisi eius, et fugiant qui oderunt aium a facieius.
Sicut deficit, fumus deficant,
Sicut fluit sera a facieni.
exurgat Deus, fortitudum nostra, in nomine tuos descadent. Exurgat Deus, victoria sancta, in lumine crucis
Cantate Deo, psalmum dicite nomini eius, parativiam Domino, quia standit super soelos.
Dominus nomen illi, exultate ante fasci meius.
Pater orphanorum et iudex viduare.
Exurgat Deus, fortitudo nostra, in nomine tuos descadent. Exurgat Deus, victoria sancta, in lumine crucis triumphamus.
et benedictionem Deo.
habitat in adiutorio altissimi, sub umbra Dei celi requiescet.
Dices Domino, refugium meum, Deus meus, in te speramo. Custodia Domini, lumen fidei, scuto forti cor meum tegit. Non timebo noctem, nec sagitas, Christus Victor, semper mecum est.
Liberabite delaque ostium, et verbo aspero inimicorum.
Sub penis suis te proteget, in lumine tuo pax
Custodia Domini, lumen fidei, scuto forti